education. And it's all part of the California Healthy Youth Act, mandates from the state of California on curriculum and materials and content to teach our students. And the detail, are you going to talk a little bit about Chaya?
Oh, stacks.
Okay, great. So I'd like to welcome Vanessa from Health Connected, which is the curriculum materials we'll be using this year in your science classes with your 7th graders. And she's going to give you a lot of information, and we'll have time for questions. And I thank you all for coming and showing interest in this topic. Welcome.
Thank you, Arthur. So yeah, my name's Vanessa, and I work for Health Connected. So my role there is Parent Engagement Coordinator. So my job is to explain the curriculum and help parents gain skills to engage their kids in their sexual health education at home. And we just recently started a family talk thing too. So really what I want from this evening is for you to leave tonight thinking, okay, I have a good idea of what's going to happen in terms of what goes on in the classroom, the content that's covered, and whether it's right or not for my family. So if you go away being sure, yes or no, then I've done my job. And so that's what I have hope for you. Now, if you didn't collect the handouts on the way in, feel free to get them on the way out. And if you want to recycle the handouts that you have, feel free to put them back. I'm a good recycler like that, and I won't get offended if I see you doing that. I'll just, no big deal. So in terms of the instruction that your kids are going to have here at Fisher, you're going to kick off on May 6th, and it runs till the end of the month. You'll receive your notification letter in April. I think there was a specific date floating around, actually. April 15th, there you go. So you will have your 2 weeks notice, which by law you need to receive, because it's quite a tricky thing to think about and wonder about and decide. So in terms of Health Connected's mission, we believe that we equip young people with information, skills and support to make thoughtful choices about their relationships and sexual health throughout their lives. We wrote the curriculum that your teachers are going to be using, and they were just recently trained, and so they're fired up, ready to go, they're fresh and they're energetic, and they loved the training. So that's the best case scenario, is when you've got teachers who are really on board with this subject. It's pretty hard to teach sexual health and relationships if you're not 100% loving it. So you're really fortunate here at Fisher to have a great staff that are running with your curriculum and are enthused about the content. In terms of us, our reach has increased certainly in the last 2 years, because the California Healthy Youth Act came into effect in January 16. And it just absolutely changed the sexual health landscape in schools, and I'll explain how it did that in just a minute. We train over 1,000 teachers a year, and your teachers were part of that, and we speak to loads of parents. We spoke to 16,000 students just last year all by itself. And those 1,000 teachers then reach about 60,000 students. So yeah, there's a lot of work to do. Our curricula looks like this. So it's that binder, but they're all different colours depending on which year level it's taught. So your binder is this teal one. If you want to sit down and have a really good look at the curriculum page by page, I think there's over 300 pages or something, but allow time, if that's what I'm saying. If you want to go through it, that's no problem at all. The school can manage to give you a copy and sit down and you can have a look through that. Or the district office, which is easier, or both maybe.
They could just contact me.
Yeah.
I have a copy of the curriculum in my office.
There you go.
We can have it full on.
And RC has been trained as well. So you'll get a really good discussion happening and have questions answered. Now, in terms of instruction in the classroom, we give fabulous information. Your science teachers are very skilled, and the kids get to sort of learn together in a peer setting, so they get to sort of a little microcosm of society in that classroom, so they get to really do some excellent social and emotional learning together. But our instructors and your teachers and the curriculum really can't talk a lot about values. So we can talk about those universal values such as respect and tolerance and inclusion and kindness and those sorts of things, we can do that. But we can't really dig deep for the controversial values, those things that really are informed by your faith or your heritage or your ethnicity, culture, family background, all those things that make your family a unique little unit. We can't really talk a lot about those because we just couldn't cover every single family's diversity. It's just absolutely impossible. But that's where we really do hope to partner with parents so that you can actually talk about what they might have learnt in class and your family's values, because sometimes they'll align perfectly and sometimes they might sort of divide, and it's a great idea to have conversations about that. Because your kids are preparing for adulthood. It seems like they're very, very young. I get that. My children are 17 and 14, so I'm sort of right in the mix as well of adolescence. But really, we're preparing them to be functional adults. And part of that is getting their own value system sorted and wondering what moral code is going to sort of situate and orient them in their own life. So part of those discussions is doing that. So don't hold back. Have those conversations at home because it's really, really helpful for that holistic sense of sexual health education. It's really good. So any questions so far, just about maybe Health Connected or the curriculum in general, because I'm going to get into the nitty-gritty in a minute. I've chosen some of the most, I suppose, controversial activities in the curriculum so we can have a look at those. The less controversial things like anatomy, most adults at home think, oh, good, finally, we can deal with that. But there are some things that parents sort of raise their eyebrows at. They're the things that I've chosen to talk about tonight. But anything prior to that? I'm going to delve into the law. The California Healthy Youth Act came into effect a couple of years ago. And prior to that law, they're really, apart from the national sexual health standards, which have been around for a long, long time, particularly they promoted HIV education, which is still in the curriculum. But there wasn't anything very binding from the government to say schools have to teach X, Y, Z. And by the time kids got to college, we had no idea of what they knew. So we didn't know whether they even could define consent. We didn't know how much information they had on sexually transmitted infections. We had no idea of whether they knew how to use birth control reliably. We didn't know whether they could hold sort of a healthy relationship and pick out red flags and wonder about how to be in a couple respectfully. There were so many things that we didn't know, but we shoved our kids off to college and the results or the sexual assault numbers are not good. And so sometimes we're hoping that by educating kids about respectful relationships and consent and all those personal boundaries and those sorts of things, it might hopefully translate into better college data down the road. But anyway, it's good for our own personal way of carrying ourselves through life, to know the definitions of such things. So then the government came in 2016 and said, right, well, everybody now has to, all schools, not parents, but all schools have to educate through a comprehensive sexual health program at least once in middle school and at least once in high school. So that was the government mandate. You can do it more often if you want, but you have to do it once in middle school and once in high school. Parents don't have to send their children to those classes, but the schools have to offer it. That way, hopefully, by the time kids transition out of high school, potentially into college and the workforce and adult life, we know that they've learnt about sexually transmitted infections. We know that they know how to use contraception reliably. We know that they know the definition of consent, some part of the law, and we know they know how to conduct themselves in a relationship. Whether they follow all of that advice is really difficult to say. It's certainly subjective. But we know they're being taught, and it's not only being taught once, but it's being taught twice. hopefully, well, we know the birth rate, the teen birth rate is going down and the abortion rate's going down, so that's a good thing. But hopefully other things will translate too. Now, if someone wants to do puberty talk, puberty sort of sexual health education, then the government says you don't have to do that in an elementary school, but if you do, there are certain things that you have to follow. So it's not mandatory for an elementary school to give sexual health instruction, but if they do, they still have to follow the mandates as well. So this is for K to 12. So if there was a kindergarten sexual health class, it would still have to have these next two slides. It needs to be age appropriate. So that kindergarten class would look very different to a puberty talk, which looks very different to our teen talk middle school curriculum, which looks, even though the subjects are very similar, looks different to the high school curriculum. So it's all scaffolded, it's all sequential, and that's appropriate for child and adolescent learning. The factual information has to be medically accurate. Our information, we have lots of people that are really helpful in making sure that we're held accountable in terms of medically accurate information. The most sort of helpful one is Palo Alto Medical Foundation. They have been very helpful to us. They spend a long time trawling over things. Anytime there's a new advancement, they let us know and we can update the curriculum straight away. We really love to encourage communication with you guys. That's mandated by the government, that they know parents are very important in the sexual health education process. A lot of us don't really sort of want to be intentional and deliberate about that because it's really frightening. But the government knows how important our relationships are with our kids and how our kids watch us and they listen to us. And whether we like it or not, they are being educated by our value system and our attitudes. So we want to be on board, and we do that through the homework. So I encourage most of you as you came in to grab that sheet called Back in the Day. And that's the homework that your kids will bring home as like an interview. So you don't have to tell them that you have that. That's your little cheat sheet, just so you know what they're going to ask you, because sometimes some of the questions can take you by surprise. It's nice having a bit of a heads up. But yeah, make sure that you, if they ask you, because sometimes kids don't ask their adults at home. They might ask their neighbour or their grandma or somebody else. That's fine. If they're asking a trusted adult, whoever that adult is, that's fantastic. So try not to get hurt feelings, even though we sort of do a bit, because we want to be the one that our kid wants to ask the questions to. But it's a really good thing just to sit down and have a chat, and keeps us connected in terms of sexual health. Because a lot of kids can talk to their adults about anything at all except bodies or except relationships or except sex. And we want to bridge that gap too, because we know it's super protective in terms of delaying sexual intercourse. So it's a really important thing. It needs to be appropriate for everybody. So everybody sitting in the classroom has to feel welcome. Nobody needs to feel targeted. We know kids that when they feel sort of unwelcome or not included, they don't learn as well. Everyone in that class needs to be feeling welcome within that space and very safe. We have our instruction materials in Spanish, totally in Spanish. So if there are students that are struggling with language, sometimes if they're not Spanish speaking or English speaking, there might be an aide that can come in and help that student with the curriculum so they don't miss out. And we can't reflect or promote bias. So there's going to be some bias, evidently. If we have been mandated by the government to only teach now comprehensive sex ed, we can't just pick and choose what we want to throw in a curriculum anymore, then there's going to be some bias. But we can't pick the bias that we need. So some people say, oh, but can't you just teach them that you can't have sex outside marriage? It'd be really good if you could teach them that. And we say, well, it might be great for your family, but it might really get up the nose of another family. And so that's not our role to be the judgment makers of values. That's for your family, you have that discussion. For us, we just teach what is out in the world, and then it's your job to get behind your child and navigate that and help shepherd that, because that's your role as parents and responsibility. but it's not ours to make those judgments on behalf of you. In terms of affirmatively recognising that people have different sexual orientations, we do that through, most effectively, I think, is we do include it in a class, but in the stories that we use for critical thinking, we have all different examples of different people. And those stories include people who are same-sex attracted, people who are trans, people who have same-sex parents, all different stories so that everyone can feel like, yeah, I'm represented. I don't feel like I'm on the outside. We teach about gender expression and gender identity, and we teach it through in a different, sex assigned at birth, so biological parts, as being different than gender. Now this is a political debate, really more so than particularly a science debate or a values debate. So have that discussion at home. If you think that that biological sex or sex assigned at birth cannot be separated from gender, great, have a talk about it, because they're the opinions that people are going to have in the world anyway. So you're just sort of having that discussion early on. A lot of the conversations we have are anticipatory. They're not necessarily going to use these skills tomorrow. In fact, a lot of the skills we hope they won't use tomorrow, but we're preparing them for down the track so they can be built on, they can be revised, they can be relearnt, they can be repeated, and by the time they're ready to use the skills, they've got this stack of library that they can pull out resources and go, yeah, I can solve that problem because I have information. So we teach healthy relationships, often by teaching not healthy relationships. So we might say, have a story, and the story is actually about a not very healthy relationship, but the kids don't necessarily know that. And they read that together in their small group, and when they feel like, ooh, that doesn't sound right, that's a red flag. So they pick those red flags out. And then they have a little discussion, and then the educator brings them back, make sure that everyone's on track, because sometimes kids, go off on their own tangent. But so that's how we do it, through critical thinking and using stories. Because our repertoire of healthy relationships is pretty small. Like, we might have an awesome family, might have a couple of good friends, but we don't expect kids in middle school to have a massive sort of selection of all different types of relationships. But we want them to be prepared for when they do. Then decision making, negotiation and refusal skills. Our program is about pretty much slowing things down. Adolescence is a time where a lot of stuff happens very, very quickly. Bodies are developing very quickly. The emotional part of the brain is completed. It's adult, and then all those powerful emotions are just like ours, except the prefrontal cortex, that part of the brain that's judgment related, the part of the brain that's executive functioning and organising and all of that, that's like way, way underdeveloped. So in terms of feeling like they want to do something, that'd make me feel really good, and it's a very sudden decision. Yes, I'm going to go to that party and I'm going to do that because that's going to make me feel really good. It's going to make me popular and give me this sense of belonging. So it's very quick to leap to that sort of decision. The prefrontal cortex that says, whoa, slow down, hang on, what if this happened? Have you thought about that? What if your friend, da, 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 all those judgment things, very slow to develop. So we talk them through that sort of thing. And you can do that at home too, because it's very difficult for adults, for teens rather, to make the same sorts of decisions as adults in the same way, because they're just not there yet. Like, it's impossible. So we get that process started using scenarios and problem-solving skills. Talk about a lot about HIV, but it's in the context of other sexually transmitted infections. So we choose the 9 most common, and so that's all in the curriculum, and the government mandates that HIV is still taught, even though it's been a long, hard, uphill battle. We're not there yet, so that's still included. We talk about medicine and we don't talk a lot about injectable drugs, but we mention how it's a way of protecting against transmission of HIV. We do talk about not having sex. So I can't remember that slide, but we do talk about abstinence. Oh, it was the previous one. There we are. Abstinence from sexual activity. We don't call it abstinence as such because sometimes that's a word that's hard to get your head around because you can abstain from all sorts of things. But we do talk about not having sex. Not having sex in regards to HIV, but not having sex for a variety of other reasons. And I'm going to really talk about that quite specifically in a moment, so I won't go there for too long. And we talk about birth control and how somebody would access that if they needed to. And access to resources. Like if somebody didn't have a trusted adult at home that they could go to and talk with and sit down with or take them to the doctor, what would that person do? And the California law actually supports people who don't have access to trusted adults. They can actually go to a clinic for free and receive maybe an STI test or some advice or some medication. So it's an important thing for kids to know, particularly if they're not supported at home. We talk about birth control, instruction on then birth options. So what are the 3 legal options in California? Well, that's parenting or adoption or abortion. Again, we don't get very sort of involved in values types of work because that's your area, not ours, but we do define what these things might look like. Talk about prenatal care, talk about the safe surrender law, that somebody, if they have a baby, they actually can leave it at emergency services, for example, and they do have the opportunity to reclaim that baby because they might be in shock, but they might not know in the moment what to do. So there's a law that actually supports people in that situation. We do now talk about human trafficking. We always talked about sex trafficking in our curriculum. It's always been there. But in 2018, the government decided, actually, California really sucks at this. This is something that our state is not great about. Our human trafficking is quite high. And we only really talked about sex trafficking. And the government says, no, there's other types of human trafficking like labour, agriculture, childcare. There's other parts other than sex trafficking. So we've added that. And we talk about in the curriculum sexual harassment as opposed to sort of what that is as opposed to sexual assault and define them so that people can use language appropriately and also identify if it's happening to themselves or a friend. Often we talk about if it happened to a friend because that takes the onus off the person and puts it onto somebody else, so it's not as personal and people can open up a little bit more broadly if it's about a friend. And we talk a lot about consent, but I'll give you more of that when we're there. Any sort of questions about those little pieces of law before we talk in the next section? If you're sort of like, whoa, that was a lot of information, Vanessa, I have no idea what you just said, but it all sounded sort of, like logical. There are some sheets there that you can take home and just sort of have a look at and just solidify some of the thoughts that you might have, or you can, the grid one ticks off all of those things and the curriculum, so you can have a look at that. Still in regards to the law, people can contract other people like Health Connected to come and deliver the curriculum, but in this case you don't have to worry because your science teachers are delivering the curriculum and they've been trained, so they're experts in the field. In terms of parent notification, this is important for you to know that it's not opt-in. You won't be receiving a permission letter that you have to sign and hand back so that your child can be opted into the program. Instead, it's an opt-out situation. So if you do not want your kid participating in the lessons, that is fine, no problem at all. Just write a letter or an email to your science teacher so they can give your child permission to be excused. It's always a good thing to say, what will my child be doing instead of sexual health, the sexual health program? And then, it's never going to be sex ed, or it's nothing going to be... I did hear, though, of some schools saying, oh, well, you go to the library and you look at the reproductive system of animals, so that's a possibility. But just make sure that it's worthwhile work, so that you can say, oh, well, it's 10 hours of instruction, so you want it to be a valuable sort of time spent, because 10 hours is a fair bit of instruction. Is yours 10 or 12 hours?
Without block scheduling, it's going to take 3.5 weeks.
Yeah, wow, perfect.
Because we have, but it's...
Yeah, but it's probably around the 10 hours, I would imagine.
Looking at the minimum times, it looks like it's just a bit more than that.
More the better. Great. So yeah, just need to know that, if your letter, I don't know whether it's going to come by email or a physical copy or both, but sometimes if it's a physical copy, it's down the bottom with the banana peel and the smelly socks and the pens that don't work anymore, and you might not physically see it. So ask your child around April 15th, hey look, I know that you're meant to get a form, and look out for the emails as well, so that you can be informed, and you'll have your 2 weeks. Our typical opt-out rate at Health Connected is 1.52%, so it's a very low opt-out rate. And so doing it this way, you can imagine you get 1 opt-out rather than 100 letters to say, yes, I'd like my child to participate. So it's a really great sort of cutting down of bureaucracy. Everybody's got to be happy about that. Any questions before we move on to curriculum? Yes?
So if we do opt out,
Yes.
where will our child go?
Good question.
We haven't discussed that with the office yet with the admin, but we will have worthwhile assistance.
Will they be able to use that time to work on necessary homework like math?
Well, they'll be doing curriculum for science.
So it's still going to be science?
It's still going to be science. It's it's science time.
Yeah, definitely. Great question. Thank you. Yeah, so stay tuned is the advice there. Yeah. Any others?
Or you can
Yes.
select it.
You have to select before you do it, otherwise it's just going to happen.
Basically, it's the school's role, help with the curriculum that you're providing, to present the information.
Yes.
It's the parent's role to provide values, and I think that makes a lot of sense, because there's going to be a wide variety of positions. It's not polarized. I'm sure there's a whole spectrum of how people feel about specific topics. But with respect to just delaying sexual activity, I think I just heard that sound bite for just 1 second and went through. I wasn't clear on, does the curriculum at least present that is a good thing, or does it talk about, how is that presented?
Great question. I'm going to spend a bit of time specifically talking about that, because there's a whole lesson on abstinence. So I want to be really clear about that. So if at the end of my little spiel about that, I'll come back to you and say, did that answer it? And if not, we can go from there. Because that's really, that's probably the key part of the whole curriculum that really concerns parents, is well, you're going to talk about sexual behaviour, and yet you say that it decreases sexual behaviour. How does that even look? So yes, definitely going right there in just a minute. Anything else? All right, well, let's keep going. So in terms of our approach, we've always used mixed gender classrooms. We really believe that it's important to really have understanding for everybody. And of course, understanding then facilitates empathy. If we can't understand another person's position, then it's almost impossible to feel for them and wonder about their own experience, and put ourselves on the back burner for just a minute and listen to their perspective. If you have no understanding, it's impossible to do that. So we really want to foster empathetic school communities, so that people who are different don't have to be bullied mercilessly like they have been in the past. It's really important for school culture, for grade culture even, or class culture. We want it to be interactive and fun, so we try and get kids out of their seats and talking with one another and learning at the same time. Working memory is so much better when kids move. And we're wanting to practice communication, because all of this whole subject, if kids can't talk either with you or with their partners or with their friends, and they bottle it all up, as they do, because they're trying to figure out the world, and if they have no one to talk to, who are they going to go to? Of course they're going to Google. Of course, like there is no other avenue. In the olden days, I don't know what people did. They probably went and found a little textbooks in some dusty corner of a library, but now it is so easy to have your questions answered that's what happens. So we really do want to encourage them, and we do the whole way through every lesson. We push them to talk with their adults at home. And I'll talk about question box later as well. That's who we're aligned with. That's what I was saying before. It's not just a couple of educators in, a room just deciding what to teach. We actually have had, it's been an amazing, long and arduous process, getting the curriculum to the point at which it's been accepted as the top curriculum in one of the top 3 in California, but we came out top when we did the whole alignment process with the California Healthy Youth Act. These are all the topics. There's a lot of them. I've colour-coded them in typical lesson arrangements, but the beautiful thing about the curriculum is it's very dynamic and flexible. So the curriculum may not be organised exactly like that, but that's just one way, because people look at the binder and say, there's 12 sections in the binder, how could that possibly be 10 lessons? Because some of the sections can blend together. So anonymous question box will happen every day. The students get to ask a question, and the teacher will take that home. They won't answer it on the same day, because sometimes the questions are quite tricky. And they'll look at those overnight, and they'll come back the next day, and then they'll provide their answers for that. We stick to the curriculum. So if there are things that are way outside the maturity level and are not covered in the curriculum, the teacher will say, somebody asked a fantastic question, but we can't answer it today because it's outside the bounds of the curriculum, but what a great question to ask your adults at home. So we refer back to home. You might be thinking, well, how does a kid know whether it's their question that the teacher's referring to? Because usually we can answer all of the questions. It's really just 1, perhaps 2 each lesson that we can't answer, because usually the question's fantastic. So they know. It's like, oh, my question didn't get answered, and then the teacher says that, and they're like, oh, okay. So they might ask you, and they might not. We can't force the issue. Here's some examples. I'll read them because it's hard to see sometimes. My parents are way overprotective when it comes to me and relationships. They don't want me to have one because they want me to have good grades. How can I show them I can maintain grades and a relationship? So that's a very thoughtful question from a pretty young person. I don't want to have that dinner time